All right, so I'm here with Hannah. We're like in front of the mail room.
Mail services.
There's so many people.
Cinematic department too.
All right, in front of the cinematic department.
Yeah.
So, what are the pros of APU?
Can you just ask me like what one of them is?
Oh yes, what is the
Cool.
pro of APU? So, what is the best pro of APU?
Oh my gosh. Probably. Okay. Well, the acting department is actually one of the top 20 in the country, so that's like a pretty big pro.
And we're pretty new.
Yeah, exactly. It's only
Like-
been around for like 5 to 10 years.
Yeah.
So, yeah, maybe even less. Pretty crazy.
Yeah. So, if you're interested in acting,
Highly
do
recommend
it.
Yeah.
We just got out of class. What would you say is your top pro and con of APU?
Yeah, okay. My top pro and con is the same thing. So the fact that it's a Christian university. So
That's good.
Yeah, so my pro about it is like, for me personally, like I learned a lot more about scripture being here. Like I was really resentful at a lot of scripture because I learned it a certain way and I was like, oh, okay, so like there is no place for me as a woman here in Catholicism especially. And having learned a lot more about scripture through school, like I've realized that I've been learning about it a lot incorrectly. So there's a lot of aspects that I hadn't known before about women within the church and the history of scripture and things like that like I didn't know were the way they were actually. So I just didn't know the context, and I felt like I'd never been taught the context until I got here. And so I've really grown in my faith for that reason. But the fact that it's a Christian university is also a con because there's just so much. There's still a very conservative, very old-fashioned view on it here at the school sometimes.
That's true.
And so, and it's actually really funny because I feel like the theology department is the most like modern with it, and it's actually the students that are the most behind in it. And so, yeah, they have a very liberal view, and then the students are the ones that are more conservative. But so when you start bringing things up, sometimes people say things, or there is like a chapel requirement, and people like chapel, but it's the fact that it's like so structured and so procedure and rule based.
3 times a week.
3 times a week, and you only get so many absences, and it's just the fact that like there is a restriction to it that makes it frustrating for people. So
Yeah, that was very, very well said.
thank you.
All relatable. And disclaimer, not everyone is gonna be like super conservative, so don't be scared off by that, but
Yeah.
it is a thing here, so
It's actually really more administration than it is the students. I feel like more students
That's
are liberal
true.
than, yeah. It's very like case by case basis.
true. It depends. Alright, so I'm here with Jessica. So the other 2 people that were in this were both acting majors, but I finally found someone who's not an acting major.
I'm not. I'm an art major.
So, what would you say is a pro and con for APU?
I mean, there's a lot of both. Okay, so I think there's a lot of pros and a lot of cons. I have to like a lot of kind of like interdigitate. I think one of the biggest pros is like we take like it's super like I take it for granted just like how easily we can talk about God. Like you forget like that's like a weird thing. It's like
That's a good point.
ooh. Like my professor, she was like, I could never say bless you to someone at her like USC class or Cal State Long Beach class. She's like, I can't have a Bible on my table. And like she brought me
Oh.
and she like brought me a Magnificat and she was like, Jessica, like here, I brought you this. And I was like, it's also just like like with friends, it's like, oh, how's your day? And you're like, oh, it's pretty bad. And you're like, I'll pray for you. And you're like, thanks.
That is a thing.
Also, I think one of the negatives of that, like a con of like the fact that everything here is Christian, is like there's a lot of like fake Christianity. There's a lot.
Ooh.
And like it's just like, oh yeah, like I love God. It's like, well then why don't you act like it? Why don't you love me the way God would love you?
That is true.
Like a lot of people like you know, like they're the very cookie cutter Christian. It's like, oh yeah, I go to this
Yeah.
church. My clothes are only this long or this short. My hair is this length. Like, oh, you don't go to this church? You don't listen to like fellowship? You don't listen to this like music? Cool.
So they're like, they say stuff, but they don't necessarily follow.
And I feel like it's not, a lot of it is unintentional.
Yeah.
But like, it's just like with anything, you get caught up in the hype, and like, it's like the cool thing to be Christian at APU, because that's obviously what we all are. But, I don't know, it's like, and a lot of it is like broadcasted on social media a lot here. Like,
Oh yeah.
I take a moment to like talk about God, and I'm like,
All the bios and like captions.
yeah, or like people's Instagram stories where like, I'm like, okay, like I think that's a great way, but like, I feel like our relationship with God is so much more deeper than anything that social media could ever like even come close to grasping. So like, you know, there's people who are like broadcasting their faith on social media, but they've never sat down with someone and had a genuine conversation about like, what does God mean to them? You know, if that's the biggest problem I have in life, we're chill. But it's like, it's nice to know that like, in a way, we kind of all have a very similar standard.
Oh yeah.
Like, you know, that differentiates with like a lot of people, and like, you know, even like we can all like be Christian, but like, you're like, oh, I don't agree with that morally, but like we can still be friends.
That's true. Yeah, there's like a similar
I think, especially
line.
like, probably for like all those people who are like dating and like in relationships here, I feel like that was probably like something that played a big part. And then I was like, oh, well, like we're all like, oh, he's Christian too. Like, it's not something that like you have to find out on like date 9. It's like, well, we met in CLFM, so what you gonna say? We met at chapel, I guess. We met at chapel together.
Ring before spring. That was really, really good and deep.
That's so funny. I mean, I got other cons. I got other.
Did you want to spill them?
I think I probably shouldn't.
Depends on what they are.
Depends, you know.
Well, there you have it. That is the top pros and cons of APU.
Come to APU.
Well, thank you guys for watching, and I'll see you in the next video. Bye!